So the over-demonization constantly of Trump in particular and people that support him, I've always felt is extremely dangerous.
Are we saying that Donald Trump has never demonized his opponents?
Not at all. And in fact, I completely agree with you when you say that there are many examples on the right of violence amongst the far right.
So Piers Morgan just hosted his first Piers Morgan Uncensored panel about the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I suspect there'll be more to come, but this panel went exactly as you might expect. It was loud, it was intense, there was a lot of rancor and emotion, and really the topic of debate wasn't even so much the assassination itself, but political violence in general and violent rhetoric in general, and whether it manifests more on one side or the other, or indeed exclusively on one side or the other, as several of Piers Morgan's guests seem to indicate. I will note that, again, just two things, just in case you live under a rock and you've never seen a Piers Morgan Uncensored panel before. Number one, these things tend to be lopsided. The liberals tend to be outnumbered, sometimes 2-1. There's no exception here. It's 4 conservatives or centrists pretending to be conservatives, and 2 liberals or 2 progressives, Louis Goodall and Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. And the second thing is, Piers Morgan himself, he tends to grade Trump and MAGA on a curve, but as we saw in that opening clip, he concedes multiple times. He's forced to concede that Trump uses demonizing, vilifying, dangerous rhetoric, and political violence does exist on the right, and that pisses off the other conservative co-hosts as well. So again, prepare yourselves for some heated debate. It gets pretty spirited. We'll start with this clip here.
Where I would disagree, possibly with you, possibly with other members of the panel, is that this is somehow just confined to the left, or the idea that this is just happening on the left. Yes, there have been examples of that. We've just seen it just now. I was disgusted at the reaction to what happened with Luigi Manzioni earlier in the year. Very similar sort of phenomenon.
Yeah.
But let's see where it's happened in other parts of the right. Do you remember what happened with Paul Pelosi, for example? Nancy Pelosi's husband almost killed to death. What was the reaction of not just some random left-wing accounts, not some teacher, not whatever, but Don Jr., Donald Trump Jr. He decided to put out a picture of a hammer and some underpants and say, I've got my Paul Pelosi Halloween costume tonight. This is the wider legitimization of violence that we're seeing. And let's just have a look. I mean, let's talk about some accounts that I've been looking at. You've been horrified what you've seen on Twitter, some stuff I've seen on Blue Sky, some stuff I've seen on X over the course of the last 24 hours. Liberals can never be allowed to run this country again. How can you coexist with people that want to murder you? If you vote Democrat at this point, you're a demonic, evil person. I will support whatever saves our country. Trump has a blank check as far as I'm concerned. I could go on, I could go on, and I could go on. And I could give a list of all of the many occasions we've seen in recent years of right-wing, hard right, far-right terrorism that we saw against what happened in Minnesota. I mentioned Paul Pelosi, Josh Shapiro. In fact, I disagree with just as a matter of fact. Investigators found in the Shapiro case, online activity and writings that included extreme right-wing, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and rhetoric against Shapiro, who is, of course...
And it goes on like this. I mean, I could play the whole thing. You guys should definitely watch the whole thing. But that's Louis Goodall, who I've not seen on Piers Morgan before, but laying out the case that, hey, listen, political violence exists anywhere, or everywhere, excuse me. And he even makes a case at one point, maybe in one of these clips, that according to official U.S. government statistics, political violence, acts of political violence tend to be more represented on the right than the left. It obviously doesn't excuse it when it happens on the left against the right. But if we're going to try to pretend, or if somebody's going to pretend that this is exclusive to the left, it's just objectively not true. Here's another clip.
Are you really saying that the American right, the Trump right, MAGA, has not got a problem with political violence?
Are you comparing? Wait, are you comparing us, who, by the way,
no, I'm asking
for
whether
how many years have 10 years? Hold on. Are you comparing the two? Hold on. I'm not saying that the right doesn't get violence, but show me where they're celebrating the murder of a father on a campus. Give it to me. Who celebrate Luigi Mangione, where he's in magazines and girls want to marry him and want to be with him?
No, you just have the president of the United States' son. You just have the president of the United States' son tweeting out a picture of a hammer, making fun of a guy who nearly got killed because of a right-wing maniac. Please do not tell me that somehow one side is more morally superior than the other. This is not.
No.
And just while we're talking about, excuse me, sir. While we're talking about political violence,
doing the assassinations?
What about January the 6th? What about January the 6th, where a MAGA mob decided to try to use violence to overthrow democracy? That is the definition of the legitimization of violence in the political process.
How many people? Excuse me, since you're such an American historian, how many people died on January 6th?
So it's not just about deaths. And he's referring to Ashley Babbitt, who is a traitorous member of the Air Force who was part of the violent insurrectionist mob. And she was shot and killed by Capitol Police. And yes, that is tragic. It's tragic in the sense that she was radicalized into believing a lie about the 2020 election by Trump and his supporters. And she betrayed her oath by trying to violently attack members of Congress in order to prevent Trump from leaving office and President Biden to be inaugurated. And she was killed in the process. Again, that's very tragic. But there was also violence against police officers that day. And multiple police officers ultimately died in matters in conjunction related to the January 6th insurrection. So good on Louis Goodall for making that point and for pushing back on Vinny Oshana from the Patrick Bet David podcast. Again, it gets pretty intense. Constantine Kissen, who is the co-host of Trigonometry, excuse me, well-known enlightened centrist who's coded right. I mean, he's enlightened centrist in that he's just a very shy pro-Trumper. He's less shy now in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's brutal assassination. And this is what he has to say about the notion of political violence and where it can be found.
But as for the debate we've just heard, look, I'm in a very conciliatory mood, and I think it's important that we're all responsible with our words. But I found it difficult to sit there and listen to this preposterous conversation you've just had. I don't understand this time last year, I sat across from one of your guests, Cenk, on that particular occasion, in which he tried to persuade me for 20 minutes that Donald Trump was a fascist. That's how the left talks about their political opponents. And I'm someone who's not politically affiliated. I'm just looking at the facts of what I see. We have had for the last 10 years, what has happened to the word Nazi as a result of the woke left's behavior is completely unacceptable. This is a word that we had for a very specific group of people that was supposed to describe people who believe in National Socialism and fascism. These words have very specific meanings, and the meanings that they had were very important for being able to describe people who are actually of that opinion. And instead, both in America and here across the Atlantic in Britain, we've had, and we're not talking about people on Twitter or people on Blue Sky. I'm talking about David Lammy, who's the current deputy prime minister, talking about a group of conservative Eurosceptics and saying they're worse than Nazis. We've had this for a whole decade now, the complete dehumanization of people for simply having political disagreements.
As if that doesn't exist on the right against the left. It's kind of preposterous, really, when you think about it, because Donald Trump has said all sorts of demonizing things about his political opponents. I will also note J.D. Vance referred to Donald Trump as a Nazi. RFK Jr. has referred to Donald Trump as a Nazi. You know, prominent Democrats don't refer to Donald Trump as a Nazi. You can find random people on social media and perhaps even political commentators to do it, but certainly not the political leaders or the thought leaders of the liberal left movement. And again, just the false equivalence here is a bit absurd, and to also pretend it doesn't exist on the right, kind of dishonest. Here's another clip.
But there's one thing that I've noticed. A great mentor of mine once told me, he said, Constantine, the greatest insights come from looking at what is not there. And the one thing I have noticed that hasn't been there in my mind, you tell me if this is different for you, Piers, over the last few days, I've had no expectation that there would be burning, looting, riots in the streets, attacks on police officers across America or Britain or the rest of the West. We haven't seen any of that, and we haven't expected any of that. And
so the point he's making is, hey, listen, if you really want to see which side is more violent, look to the fact that, Charlie Kirk was assassinated and there have not been a string of mass riots, which, number one, there may yet be. I hope they're not. Certainly there are not yet, but it may happen. Number one. Number two, he's obviously making a veiled reference to the Black Lives Matter George Floyd protests of 2020. Now, I'd argue that's a bit different. Number one, because systemic racism has existed in U.S. policing. That's just simply a matter of fact. Number one. Number two, George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight by a police officer. And yes, we have higher expectations of government agents. The riot, like, black people are killed all the time in this country. White people are killed all the time in this country. The fact that these protests emerged the way they did wasn't because a black person was killed or even brutally killed. It was the fact that a black person was killed on camera at a time when we were already, suffering all sorts of societal strains due to COVID. And it happened at the knee of a police officer. All of those things, kind of like coiled together and erupted the way it did. Now, obviously, the riots and the vandalism and the violence was unacceptable. All of it was unacceptable. All of it was wrong. At the George Floyd protests also constituted a relatively small amount, not to excuse it, but anyone who suggests that that was the entire animating principle of the biggest mass protest, social protest we have seen. I mean, you're talking about 20 million people across 50 states, I think it was, for months at a time. It was massive, the scale of it. But again, it was all those things factored together. So I think you're kind of comparing apples and oranges here, again, to say nothing of the fact that it might happen in the future. And the last thing I'll say before I play this clip, this idea of, well, what about what we expect? You know what I didn't expect after Donald Trump won the election and President Biden and Vice President Harris conceded the election? I didn't expect a January 6th insurrection by liberals and progressives and Democrats against a second Trump presidency, even though most of us think he is an authoritarian or a fascist. So if we want to play that game, we can. But what that would suggest is that the left and Democrats are less violent because, unlike the Republicans, we didn't try to overthrow the government violently. So again, this game can be played both ways. Here's another clip.
Same thing on the left. This guy's a lunatic. Are there extreme left-wingers? By the way, the clip that you showed, Piers, no prominent Democrat or left-wingers on there. But that clip sickened me. It sickened me. So
okay, but Cenk,
elements in the left now,
hang on,
of course,
hang on.
But they are not the whole left.
But hang on. You mentioned that. And in fact, there are clips, though, of high-profile people saying that stuff. Matthew Dowd got fired by MSNBC within minutes, literally, of saying this on the night that Charlie got killed.
Talk to me about the environment in which a shooting like this happens.
Yeah, and again, I emphasize what you just emphasized. We don't know any of the full details of this. That we don't know if this was a supporter shooting their gun off in celebration, or so we have no idea about this. But following up on what was just said, he's been one of the most divisive, especially divisive younger figures in this, who is constantly sort of pushing this sort of hate speech or sort of aimed at certain groups. And I always go back to hateful thoughts lead to hateful words, which then lead to hateful actions.
So we talked about this in a separate video. This is Piers Morgan's big gotcha example. Hey, there are prominent voices on the left that have been celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, because what he played earlier in the show was a compilation of people on TikTok, yes, gruesomely and very crassly and crudely taking a victory lap over Charlie Kirk's murder. That's wrong. As far as we know, they're just nobodies on social media. So that's why Piers is bringing this up. Aha! You're saying they're TikTok nobodies, but what about Matthew Dowd? Well, two things I would note. Number one, Matthew Dowd is not celebrating the death of Charlie Kirk. He's just rather callously says, in his opinion, this was almost the inevitable result of a divisive figure. Now, again, I think that's pretty callous, but that's not celebrate. It's not the same thing as what Piers Morgan showed in the montage of people literally dancing, these TikTok people literally dancing about the death of Charlie Kirk. Number one. And number two, as Piers Morgan concedes, MSNBC fired him. MSNBC fired him. Would Fox News fire Jesse Waters or Sean Hannity for saying terrible things about Democrats even after a violent attack? No, of course not. As Piers himself concedes, MSNBC fired that guy for making not a celebratory comment, but just kind of a callous comment. So that again shows the difference between the two sides when it comes to consistency of message and policing our own to the extent that we can. So I think he actually undermined his own point here. Here's another clip.
I sort of feel, and maybe we all are, maybe this is the problem, Piers, as if I'm living in a different world here. A world where the only invective that we ever hear, the only hostile language, the only violent language, and indeed call to arms, come from one side of the political debate. I would just go back to this point. US government figures show that a majority of political violence, politically related violent incidents actually come from the right, not the left. Now, I'm not sat here saying that there isn't a problem on the left. I've been the first one, quite literally, to say that. But by definition, if there are politically inspired violent incidents on the right, then what is causing those? Are they all just nutters? Are they all just mad? Or how can it be that the left-wing ones are the ones who are inspired by language? Something must be happening and causing the right-wing violence. And so by definition, presumably, that must be something that is happening in terms of the language of the other side. No, and just let me finish. And I think we heard from Kristen earlier as well, when he said the left have imbibed this idea that to get what you want, you are able and should be able to use violence. I mean, come on. Yeah, go back to January the 6th. Because MAGA, at that moment, quite literally decided to use violence to overturn an election result. And let's just talk about violent language as well for a second here. From the very, very top, Donald Trump, fight like hell. If you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Rudy Giuliani, let's have trial by combat. Republican Representative Mo Brooks, today is the day American patriots start down taking names and kicking ass. On the Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping plot, instead of condemning it, didn't condemn it. What did Trump do? He said, maybe it was a problem, maybe it wasn't. She locked down her state. Even on Mitch McConnell, his own Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, on Truth Social, Trump said McConnell had a death wish for supporting bipartisan legislation. If that's not legitimizing violence, then I don't know what it is.
Excellent points. Now I'm going to play, I think it's this next clip where they actually get into a back and forth over what Lewis Goodall just said. Yeah, it's right here. And it gets into a spirited rejoinder, but great list of things, far from comprehensive. Again, I've been referencing a Zateo article that Mehdi Hassan wrote listing recent high-profile examples of political violence perpetuated by right-wingers against the left. But anyway, this is Constantine Kissen of Trigonometry trying to respond and failing miserably.
I have to agree with Lewis. He is living in a different reality, one that has no connection to actual reality.
But what's wrong?
What are you talking
what's
about?
Incorrect about what I've just said.
You're comparing somebody saying "fight like hell" in the context of a political campaign,
in the context of a
with
lie
what
where
I
you tried to
explained
overturn
earlier.
a democratic
Lewis,
election.
can I
That's
speak
the
now?
definition of
Are you
far-right
capable
behaviour.
of listening to an alternative point of view, or
I'm
do you have to
incapable
shout
of listening
down?
to
Well,
nonsense.
shut up then. Shut up and listen if you're capable of it. Now, you can't compare somebody saying fight like hell in the context of a political campaign with what I explained earlier, which is when you call people Nazis.
The campaign was over.
Shut up and listen to an alternative opinion. Why is it that you people have a complete inability to listen to opinions that you don't like? Why can't you just sit there and actually hear what I'm saying?
I'm waiting.
You can't oh my God. You can't compare somebody saying fight like hell with somebody explaining that the country is an imminent threat of a fascist takeover, because an imminent threat of a fascist takeover is something that would actually legitimize you picking up a rifle and heading to the front line. So when you and Cenk and people like that call people you don't like far right, hard right, Nazis, and fascist, you are creating an environment in which some crazy people, yes, of course they're crazy, will feel that they're entitled to use violence to prevent the fake fascist takeover you keep banging on about.
I just want to stop right here and make sure that I do not, obviously so many clips, I want to make sure that we continue. Hang on one second.
Gone. Now, yes, the left has, or parts of the left have expressed that in terms of fascism or far right.
Okay. All right. So, okay, we're going to play this part of the clip. There's so many clips. I was losing track of, wait, I need to stop here. So that was Constantine Kissen. Hey, listen, he's just using an expression as part of a campaign, but Lewis Goodall is right. The campaign was over at that point. The election was over. President Biden was about to be certified the winner. So no, this was not campaign rhetoric. The campaign was over. So then Constantine thinks he's got him. Okay, well, okay, but here's the thing. Like the left, what they do is, you know, they say that we're on the verge of a fascist takeover, and that legitimizes violence because basically you're saying it's the end of the country. And this is unfortunately where Lewis Goodall has Constantine, metaphorically speaking, dead to rights in the debate.
Will be gone. Now, yes, the left has, or parts of the left have expressed that in terms of fascism or far right. The right have its own vocabulary and its own way of describing it. And we go back to, again, what Donald Trump said at the time when he said, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore, which is exactly, I mean, Piers, you're talking about what depraved minds here or demented minds here, and they go and turn to violence. That is precisely what we saw with January the 6th. That is what we see again and again and again. And what I just find, not only...
We'll play the rest of this, but you see how Constantine Kissen's pissed, but sorry, buddy, he checkmates you using your own logic. Donald Trump repeatedly said in the build-up to January 6th and on that speech at the Ellipse, if they didn't stop the certification of President Biden's victory, the country was over. You're not going to have a country anymore. So that is a one-to-one example of Constantine's example of if Trump gets elected, we're going to have a fascist takeover. That is Donald Trump, the then sitting president of the United States, who's infinitely more powerful, more important, and therefore more responsible, or needs to be more responsible, more culpable for his words than any people on TikTok. You've just been checkmated with your own logic. And he can't handle it. That's how you know he's not a centrist, because a centrist might be like, you know what, shit, you're right. Donald Trump did not just demonize his political opponents, but he actually said that there are specific stakes, that you won't have a country anymore. The country is over. It's all over. It's over. It's over. It's going to be taken from you. that there was a implicit threat of an apocalyptic outcome if a particular thing did not occur. But he won't admit to that because at the end of the day, he is a MAGA partisan.
Distasteful, but frankly demented, is the idea that somehow we can say that this is a problem which is unique to one side of politics.
one is
It's a
saying
problem.
that.
It's a problem which actually begats each other. It's a problem which each side, it metastasizes this problem of political violence. Each side, each time adds fuel to the fire, and it gets hot. It gets hot inside the building. So the truth is, we've all got to acknowledge, and you're talking about what happens in the far right and so on in different parts of the world. We're braced in London right now for what might happen tomorrow in terms of violence.
And then he goes on like this. You should watch the whole thing. It's really, really good. But yeah, so that is Piers Morgan's first panel about the brutal assassination of Charlie Kirk. And I'll just end with this because obviously this is a super long segment. Number one, go watch the panel. Number two, we condemn political violence. We condemn the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Political violence puts everybody in danger on the left and the right, and you forfeit that when you're part of a constitutional democratic republic. But number three, it is just incredibly dishonest to suggest that this is either predominantly or exclusively on the left when the facts say otherwise. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.